So why is it the Democrats would be prepared to drive a wedge in this country and potentially tear it apart? It goes back to what I have been saying all along. They ain't gonna stop. They can't stop. Their crimes are too great. And the only way to stop it all is to finally bring them to justice.
They're never going to stop. Congressman Green said yesterday, if the Senate doesn't convict, it will not end. This is not about Ukraine. Facts are on the president's side. Zelensky said he wasn't pressured. Ukrainians didn't even know aid was held at the time of the call. And most importantly, they did nothing to get the aid released. This is about one basic fact. The Democrats have never accepted the will of the American people. 3 weeks ago, Nancy Pelosi called the President of the United States an imposter. And the attacks on the President started before the election. July 31st, 2016, the FBI opened the Trump-Russia investigation and spied on 4 American citizens associated with President Trump's campaign. They took the dossier to the FISA court, and they lied to the court 17 times. Didn't tell the court the guy who wrote the dossier was desperate to stop Trump. Didn't tell the court the guy who wrote the dossier was working for the Clinton campaign. Didn't tell the court the guy who wrote the dossier had been fired by the FBI for leaking information to the press. And the FBI continued the investigation after the election. On January 3rd, 2017, Senator Schumer said this: if you mess with the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you. It took all of 3 days for that statement to come true. January 6th, at Trump Tower, Jim Comey briefs President-elect Trump on the dossier. The dossier that the FBI already knew was false. They do it so that they can leak it to the press, and the press will write about the fact they briefed him. The president was told he wasn't under investigation when, in fact, they were investigating him and trying to trap him at that meeting. And, of course, they continued their investigation after the inauguration. We deposed Jim Comey in this committee last Congress. He said after 10 months of the FBI's investigation, they didn't have a thing. Comey gets fired on May 9, 2017. 8 days later, Bob Mueller gets hired, and we get 2 years of the Mueller investigation. 19 lawyers, 40 agents, 500 warrants, 2,800 subpoenas, but 0 collusion. The Democrats don't care about the facts, and they're never going to stop. The whistleblower's lawyer said 10 days after the president was sworn in, coup has started, impeachment to follow. 16 Democrats on this committee voted to move forward with impeachment before Bob Mueller ever sat in front of this committee and testified, before President Trump and President Zelensky ever had their call. They're never going to stop with their attacks, because they can't stand the fact that President Trump is actually draining the swamp and doing what he said he would do, and most importantly, getting results. Taxes cut, regulations reduced, economy growing at an unbelievable pace, lowest unemployment in 50 years, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the court, out of the Iran deal, embassy in Jerusalem, hostages home from North Korea, and oh, by the way, a new NAFTA agreement coming any day now. They can't stand it, and they're never going to stop. And it's not just because they don't like the president. It's not just because they don't like the president. They don't like us. They don't like the 63 million people who voted for this president. All of us in flyover country, all of us common folk in Ohio, Wisconsin, Tennessee, and Texas, they don't like us. How about what Mrs. Carlin said last week, sitting right there? The Democrat professor who came in here and told us what she believes. Liberals tend to cluster. Conservatives spread out because they don't even want to be around themselves. How about our colleague, Maxine Waters, June of 2018, when she said this: and if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them they are not welcome anymore, anywhere. That is scary. How about Peter Strzok, the guy who ran the Clinton investigation, the guy who ran the Trump-Russia investigation, the deputy head of counterintelligence who was fired when he said this: went to a Southern Virginia Walmart, I can smell the Trump support. They don't like us. That's what this is about. They don't like the president, they don't like the president's supporters, and they dislike us so much they're willing to weaponize the government. A few years ago it was the IRS, more recently it was the FBI, and now it's the impeachment power of Congress, going after 63 million people and the guy we put in the White House. Think about what Chairman Schiff did last week. He released the phone records of the president's personal lawyer. He released the phone records of a member of the press, and he released the phone records of a Republican member of Congress. This is scary stuff. This is scary stuff, what they're doing, and frankly, it is dangerous for our country. It is not healthy for our country, and we should all remember what Emmett Flood told us, the president's lawyer, what he told us this past spring when the Mueller report first came out. It would be well to remember that what can be done to a president can be done to any of us. This is scary stuff and serious stuff, and I hope you guys will reconsider and stop it while you can.
This is why I take issue when people say things like one side of the coin is no different than the other, or politics are only there to divide us. They are now. And it should be pretty obvious to anybody even half-ass awake that this does affect us all. And to look the other way is beyond ridiculous. To look the other way is to condone the behavior of the people who are trying to subvert the Constitution, the law, and in the end, our way of life.